English translation, 405th contact. Monday, 21st of November 2005, 6:13 hours.
Good day, Edward, my friend. You are early this morning and have not slept much.
Once again I could not sleep, because I am worried about Gilgamesha. She's been operated on in the hospital. I just called the hospital and they told me that she is fine and that we can visit her today. And since I am up so early, I thought that we could continue working together on the corrections. That is why I had Florina call you. But be welcomed and greetings, my friend.
Yes, and here I am. Another time I worked through the copies that you gave me, and it occurred to me that in addition to your explanation what is a sect, you should also write something in detail about the cult and the sacrifice, because in the book by Hans Georg, there is very often talk about these facts. So you should still write the necessary and add it to the first article. This is necessary because these should be covered in more detail.
I will do it today, and also ask Hans Georg by phone if he agrees with it.
He certainly will.
Then I will quickly remove the 2 new chapters 23 and 24 from the FIGU data, just for a moment. There we have it already. Stupid, I cannot open the document again. This has happened before, because the computer cannot find the program. That is annoying, because now we can twiddle our thumbs. But I'm going to call Christina and ask her to come up in the evening to put the whole thing on the server so I can open it after all.
You should not be angry about that because I can come back later in the evening where I want to read your new articles. We can also correct it on another day. So until then, goodbye. When do you think you will be done with work so I can read it through?
I think I will be done by 18 hours or 19 hours because after I have done some work, I will sleep here in the office for a few more hours. In the afternoon, I go to visit Gilgamesha with Ava, and so it will probably be early evening until I am back here and can continue working. But if you want to go, then please do not let me rush you. I will put my work on your desk here so you do not have to wait for me, and you can read the whole thing when I am over there.
Good, then I want to go now. See you in the evening, then. Sachlomie.
Take care, Pada. 2306 Hers.
Here I am again. I picked up your articles in your workroom, even though Eva sleeps over there. I have not read them yet, but I want to do it here in the living room. Afterwards, I would like to talk to you a bit more and tell you some predictions.
I am going to go in the office because I got some incoming mail and stuff. Then I will come back here.
Good, go ahead. And with that, Pata'a starts reading the 2 articles while I go to the office to do my remaining mail work. 23-22 Hers.
So, dear friend, my office work is done. Shall we talk here, or would you like to come to the office? I would have to see Eva go to bed first, though.
I would like that, yes. We could then also do something regarding the correction work. Your 2 articles. What is a cult and what is a sacrifice are exactly what I had in mind. You should also include this work in our contact conversation, because this is also important for all those who read our conversations.
Whatever you say, I will include it right here in our conversation.
What is a cult?
The term cult is derived from the Latin word cultus, which must be translated as education or care. In the course of time, however, the meaning of worship developed from this, especially with regard to a deity, saints and angels, etc., but also the exaggerated worship of a person, an object or anything, such as sports, music, singing, paintings or animals, etc. The cult also includes adoration, which in Latin means worship or veneration, as well as proskynesis, kneeling and kissing the ground, which in ancient Greek also means veneration. In the sciences of religion and theology, the term cult is common, whereby it stands for the attempt that the believer can acquire his or her salvation and the holy by an existing tradition or determination in common, ritual, regulated action. Specifically, the ritual acts in holy places and at holy times are to be ritually cultivated in order to ensure the religious experience. Associated with this are defensive and taboo-like rituals or rituals of penance, which are supposed to ward off superhuman powers or the punishment of an angry God. In earlier forms of religion, but not infrequently also in today's main religions, the cult, which presupposes a respectful treatment of all that is sacred, and the magic by which all that is sacred is to be manipulated, could not and cannot be precisely separated from each other. Religions and religious sects form cult communities, cult religions and cult sects, in which they devise and elaborate the rituals and are also responsible for ensuring that they are carried out and observed. Social development plays a decisive role in the practice of religious or sectarian worship, so that a special individuality is given according to the head of the family. Priesthood, religious leaders, clan patriarchs, shamans, medicine men, sect gurus, kings and emperors, village elders, tribal leaders, groups of people, or other authorities. The order to practice a cult can be given by any competent authority that is powerful enough in this regard to invent rituals and to enforce them in a cult manner. A cult may also be established by an official provision, by ordination or by an official order, which is specific to an official religious form, but may also be official or military, etc. A cult always and without exception consists of ritual acts, which are accompanied by factual words and which refer to mythological interpretations, stories, traditions, legends, dogmas, beliefs, and strictly ideological guidelines and regulations, which are to be followed ritual cult-like. It is not uncommon for the cult to take on the character of a ritual cult theater, also known as a sacred drama, especially if it is based on strict belief and thus also a form of fanaticism. It must be clear that rituals and the cult actions resulting from them are not only religion-related, but also sectarian, because wherever sectarianism exists, rituals and the cult actions resulting from them also exist. That is so with every terrorist organization, so also with Al-Qaeda, with the Nazi system, and with other organized groups and organizations of all kinds, which have their own rituals and therefore also their own cult actions. The same applies to the military, because a ritualized flag consecration alone is a ritual cultic act, just as much as prescribed forms of greeting. The consecration of weapons and the chanting of the homeland or a group, etc., as well as other ritual forms. The Mafia as a sect, along with other similar or different sects, also cultivates ritual acts to which all members must adhere. In such sects, as in other groups and organizations, especially satanic cults and fanatical sects, a breach of the rituals and cult can result in punishments and possibly fatal consequences. In religions and sects, cult in the form of the practice of rituals and faith means the worship of a god. In the Christian faith also the alleged Son of God, Jesus Christ, whereby with dog-like humble posture, such as prostration, bowing and crucifixion, kneeling, kissing the ground, or touching it with the forehead, begging for help and mercy. This falls into the realm of proskynesis or worship, which goes back to a Persian court ceremonial and which was adopted into the Roman emperor's cult. In the Orthodox Church and partly in the Oriental churches, it was and is expressed as bowing the body and touching the ground with the right hand as a spirit of penance, especially during the 40-day Lent. In the Catholic Church, it is customary to prostrate, or rather the gesture of prayer, which is performed by bending both knees and deep bowing or lying on the floor for a long time, as for example during ordination. In general, the cult can be understood as a false, reverential, humble reaction, attitude, experience, and devotion to something holy. Sim Ya Se Silver Star Center, 21st November 2005, 9:16 hours Billy.
What is a sacrifice?
Sacrifice is an old High German term derived from opferon, which means to offer something to God as an offering. In church, Latin operari, the term can be explained as serving a deity through sacrifice. Sacrifice is also the term for the offering itself. The ritual cultic act of offering a gift to an imaginary deity or to a power, also a real power in the form of persons, is usually connected with the expectation of a return service. As one of the most important basic forms of religious humility, sacrifice determined the actions of religious cults from a very early stage. Especially in early religious traditions, the sacrifice served to offer this with and through all possible and impossible things, even the murder of humans, in order to appease superhuman powers, gods, god or demons, etc. Symbolic gifts were also offered as sacrifices, but in earlier times these were mainly blood sacrifices of all kinds. Sacrifices were usually in anticipation and hope of a positive reaction from superhuman powers, gods, demons, and God. At all times, the sacrifices could also exist in the context or in connection with holy meals, but also in all kinds of sacrifices of slaughter and other animals, as well as burnt offerings, in plants, fruits, drinks, food, jewelry, weapons, valuable objects and devices, aromatic substances, money, or in people, whereby especially children and virgins, but also prisoners, were preferred as victims. Human sacrifices were later transformed into so-called partial sacrifices and substitute sacrifices, for example by using only fingers, toes or hair etc. as pars pro toto or human representations, or by spiritualizing them, as well as abstinence, castration and chastity. In prehistoric religions as well as in those of tribes, numinous or shuddering and at the same time attractive, impersonal powers and forces were, and still are, at the center of attention. In this respect, sacrifice was and is a necessity for the cult believers, which makes the work of the superhuman, immanent forces and powers possible only through the imagination. Thus, for the cult adherents, the sacrifice imaginatively guarantees the fertility of nature or the cosmic order, such as the life of the ancestors or the course of the moon, the sun, and the stars. This is also connected with the usually dominant attempt of humans to make divine powers and wisdom available to themselves. Believers attribute inherent powers to the sacrifice, whereby the life of the victim is to be strengthened, protected from harm, and given power. In accordance with the cult of faith, sacrifices also serve to magically bring about rich harvests, successes in hunting, gathering, business, examinations and war, as well as favorable weather, a hoped for love, blessing of children, profit of all kinds and good health, etc. Frequently, the sacrifice is also connected with mantic aspects, that is to say, clairvoyance and divination, etc. Here, factors of the sacrifice play an important role, such as the rising smoke of the burnt offering, the condition of the liver or other organs of the sacrificed animal, as well as its behavior. In the religions that refer to deities, offerings of supplication, thanksgiving, and praise are made to God or the deities, depending on the occasion. In this connection, special mention should be made of the early primary sacrifices or first fruits sacrifices, which consisted of the offering of the first fruits and plants of the harvest, the first birth or first acquisition, etc., and which still exist in some cases today. But there are also building sacrifices, for example, for the construction of a chapel, a mosque, a synagogue, a church or a temple, etc., whereby such sacrifices are made both out of fear of death in some life-threatening situation at a later date, and as atonement for human intervention in the divine sphere of responsibility. For transgressions committed by the believer, special atonement sacrifices were and are common. Also, divine qualities gain certain elements of sacrifice even in some religions and sects, such as drinking the soma or the body in the Vedic religion. The sacrificial fire also belongs to this area. In traditional society, the act of sacrifice has always been carried out by the leader of the family community, the head of the tribe or the clan patriarch, and this has partly been passed on to the present day. In the past, kings and emperors were also the practitioners of the sacrificial acts, together with higher priests, etc., whereby these already appeared in the Old, Middle and New Stone Age, and enjoyed a very high reputation due to the importance of the sacrificial cult. It was not uncommon for these priests to be able to compete with the nobility and the royalty or empire in terms of prestige. Priests also celebrated sacrifices of the dead and hearth offerings, etc. Sacrificial ceremonies were also often held at springs, waters, and on or in moors. The effect of the sacrifice takes on an aspect of indispensability the more pronounced the idea of the personality of the deity or gods is. Thus, the sacrifice also becomes dependent on the goodwill of the deity or gods. The moral behavior of the person making the sacrifice, or the group associated with them, is decisive in determining whether the sacrifice is accepted favorably by the god or the gods. As in the Vedic religion, sacrifice can become a power, or might that can be influenced by the deity or gods, if there is only a superficial personalization of the deity or god concept. A rejection of traditional sacrifice is present in both Buddhism and Jainism, although sacrifices are nonetheless offered in certain forms, such as the feeding of monks and the donation of money, etc., by the faithful. Today's main religions, with some exceptions, basically do not know any sacrificial cult in the old and bloody forms mentioned above, but other offerings have become commonplace, which at the same time are also to be regarded as ritual acts. This refers in particular in central importance to religious and sectarian words to the veneration of the cross, crucifixes and holy books and relics, as well as idioms and quotations from the so-called Holy Scriptures, but also to prayers and songs, as well as offerings in the offertory box, etc. In Christianity, the fundamental cultic celebration of Christ's work of redemption, or the sacrifice of the cross in the Lord's Supper, is also considered a sacrifice. It is a Eucharistic celebration, or Mass, or sacrificial service as thanksgiving and gratitude, which can also be called a common memorial offering. Above all, in the popular conception of popular religiosity, the sacrificial cult lives on uninhibitedly. Only the old bloody sacrificial rites have changed decisively. Consequently, today as a rule, although sectarian divine and satanic sacrificial cults with human sacrifices still exist, only animals and feathered animals, etc., have to lose their lives senselessly with regard to blood sacrifices. Apart from all the above, cult practice has produced a large number of cult forms that are difficult to survey. Adoration, that is to say, worship and adoration, exists along with countless cleansing rites and anointments of all kinds, as well as the sprinkling and pouring of blood, oil or water over all kinds of sacrifices and objects of sacrifice, etc., which corresponds to a very frequent practice, as well as the taking of holy meals and drugs, the carrying out of processes and procedures, and the circumcision of the genitals of boys and girls, the laying on of hands, singing, reciting of holy verses as well as dancing, chastising oneself to the point of blood or fainting and games, etc., are also part of the offerings as well as the burning of perfumes. Even holy weddings, Greek hieros, are considered sacrifices, as is temple prostitution, where usually only the higher priests were and are allowed to make offerings. Every cult is interpreted as sacral or holy and serving a religious purpose, surrounded by a considerable amount of taboo regulations, which serve to make a ritual preparation for the ritual act, such as sexual abstinence and fasting, as well as ritual purification and penance. In relation to the cycle of the seasons, the cults of religions and sects also have ideas about certain holy times and days, including Sundays, religious holidays, celebrations and the religious year, etc. Often diurnal cults exist in the religions and sects, which orient themselves in the change of day and night. But these cult forms have developed only later, and partly even affect modern times, whereby undoubtedly also esotericism and New Age influences can be observed. But such diurnal cults have also existed since ancient times, as some religious traditions prove, such as the ritual celebration of the whole day, as it is expressed, for example, in the hourly prayers of Christian religious communities. In human existence, there is also a cultic accompaniment in the great caesuras or cuts in life, for example at birth, baptism, puberty, confirmation, growing up, exams, military service, marriage, illness, death and burial, etc. Similarly, cultic acts are committed when graduating from university or professional school, or when joining a religion or sect, when making peace or business decisions, at sporting or other events, at book or other award ceremonies, as well as during wars or admissions to elite universities, etc. Basically, two types of cults can be distinguished. Firstly, a cult that is based on the course of nature, and secondly, a cult that is based on the history of salvation. The nature cult is basically the celebration of the ever-recurring cycle of nature, whereby, however, different contents are in the foreground depending on economic and cultural conditions. In prehistoric times, for example, the worship of divine nature was in the foreground, because it brought about the emergence or becoming of life, food, and death. In agricultural cultures, which has been preserved until today, a spring cult or spring festival has developed, as well as a harvest cult and a harvest Thanksgiving cult or harvest festival. In this context, a monistic cosmic religiosity, that is to say, philosophical religious doctrine of the existence of only one uniform basic principle of being and reality was later formed, in which the cult had the function of ensuring the incursion of the holy divine into the profane, that is to say, unholy and non-God worshipping world at certain space-time points from above, from the heaven of God, that is to say, the heaven of gods. Especially the cult of monotheistic or one-deity religions, on the other hand, establishes the doctrine of salvation as the sole validity. Simyas, Silver Star Center, 21st November 2005, 18 hours Billy.
So that is done. But there is still a question about the bird epidemic. If I understood you correctly in one of our private conversations, there are many diseases of this kind in wild birds. You also said that confining poultry is just a precautionary measure that does not necessarily have to be, but that it is useful in one case or another.
That is correct. Among the wild birds, there are various forms of virus strains and thus epidemics, which are not necessarily deadly for them, but which can be transmitted to domestic poultry, triggering a deadly epidemic and also spreading to humans if they come into contact with the contaminated poultry. This has happened, and will continue to happen, on various occasions in the Asian region with regard to the H5N1 virus, which can have fatal consequences for humans, as has already been shown. But this does not mean that the virus has to spread from person to person, because this is only possible when a corresponding mutation of the virus occurs. In any case, such a mutation is always a question of time, whereby this can be calculated in days, weeks, months, or years, in decades, centuries, and even millennia, if at all. So, if I have spoken of the fact that a mutation of the virus is only a question of time, then this is to be understood in these time periods, which means that the mutation does not have to happen today and not tomorrow, not in weeks, months, or years, in decades or centuries, but perhaps only in 1,000 or more years, or perhaps not at all. With every bird epidemic, as with any other, it is always a question of how pathogenic or activating the viruses are in relation to an epidemic. Many epidemic-like diseases of wild birds are harmless to the birds themselves and cause them little or no discomfort. And with regard to the illness of humans with regard to the H5N1 virus, it must be said that only by this means an encroachment on it is possible, as has happened and continues to happen several times in Asia, if there is direct contact with the feces and dust of poultry or wild birds infected with the disease, after which the mucous membranes are then infected through carelessness. The meat of contaminated poultry and wild birds may also transmit the disease if eaten. And the disease can only be transmitted from person to person if there is direct contact via the mucous membranes, whereby various forms are possible. Pigs are also susceptible to the bird disease of the H5N1 virus. And there are several species of this virus, although only one species is currently dangerous for humans. Furthermore, with regard to the prophylactic measure of confining domestic poultry, it must be said that this is only useful where there is a risk that wild birds and wild fowl may come into contact with domestic poultry. And these are usually only areas where migratory birds have their flight paths. In such areas in the north of Europe, it has also been known for some time that wild birds affected by the bird epidemic have been flying in from the east. But it has not been found that contact with domestic poultry has occurred, just as it was found that the epidemic was harmless to wild birds and wild fowl.
Aha. Then it would probably be good if I were to take up the subject of bird epidemics. Again, in one of the next bulletins and supplement what I wrote in Special Bulletin number 24 of October with what you have now explained.
That would be desirable because all around there is still panic-mongering. In fact, there is only an extremely small danger for humans if they take the necessary precautions, which are also easy to observe. Those humans who have been infected by the disease in Asia, and a certain number of them have also died, have ignored all precautions and have become infected through the feces and dust of domestic poultry infected with the disease.
So it is only a question of time and whether the H5N1 virus, which is dangerous for humans, will mutate and become dangerous for them and cause a pandemic. By the way, Christina was able to arrange everything for me regarding the chapters that we could not get into the computer in the morning. So now we can work on them.
That is right. And the fact that Christina was able to solve the problem is good, but let's deal with that later. First, I want to tell you some things that are going to happen in the near future. On the 6th of November, we talked at the Official Contact Meeting 403 about the U.S.-American machinations, which you reported about in detail in Bulletin number 53, and also put the whole thing on the Internet. This led to the fact that these iniquities were taken up again, and this time more intensively in public. Of course, no one will admit that your remarks are the fundamental origin of this new publicity of the whole, because those who now go public through your initiative want to claim the merit for themselves. The fact is, however, that you are the originator of the campaign against the criminal U.S. machinations, because your bulletin has been distributed worldwide through the Internet, and its content has been taken up by various parties in order to finally take public steps in a decisive manner. You have, so to speak, lured the howlers out of their holes, and they will now openly take action in the coming weeks and expose some criminal things of the USA and its secret services, CIA, etc. But it will also become public that German politicians are involved in the crimes as well as various politicians of other states. With the human robbery and the kidnapping as well as the prisoner transports to other countries in secret torture prisons, the matter is not yet complete because torture of the prisoners and abductees has been and still is occurring. US America, however, vehemently denies this fact, which will happen especially in the second week of December by U.S. President George W. Bush, just as publicly on TV as it will happen in Germany with U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. Together with the German Chancellor Angela Merkel, the U.S. Secretary of State will appear on television, publicly spreading the enormous lie in several European countries that the USA does not practice torture and does not tolerate it, neither in her own country nor in foreign countries, despite the fact that she is very closely informed about the torture carried out by the U.S. military, the police, the secret services, and the prison guards. The woman is lying against her better judgment, showing her true attitude towards the truth, which is as unimportant to her as the fact that, in her sectarian delusion, human life is as worthless to her as it is to Bush, who is also a sectarian. With this she proves, besides G.W. Bush, the true Christian attitude, which is spread all over the world, and which in fact is not based on humanity, love, freedom, peace, and harmony, but on hatred, vindictiveness, lies, death penalty, and other evil punishments. The USA is magniloquent, megalomaniacal, arrogant, and self-important, and it defies all human rights worldwide, as well as the International Convention Against Torture, which is being denied by the U.S. powerful and their vassals, and by those parts of the people who are pro-government. Worldwide, they promote corruption and destroy the independence of the states in order to bring them under the protection and help of the U.S. American government. Also, the USA secretly and deceitfully incites violence and terror in sovereign states, in order to be able to intervene in a protective manner and to provide assistance. They also operate an unprecedented banditry, which is also confirmed in the relationship of warlike incursions into foreign sovereign states. Through the brutality and unscrupulousness, guilt, and foreign policy of the United States, millions of innocent humans have already lost their property and lives all over the world. And all this they call commitment to justice, peace, love, and freedom. So the question is how long the entire earthly population will want to close its eyes to these facts. How long it will take until earthly humanity finally awakens and recognizes the really criminal machinations of the U.S. American, and then also finally turns to effective measures. The German Chancellor, who is biased by the United States and glorifies George W. Bush, also attracts attention during her TV appearance together with Secretary of State Rice through loud-mouthed words, by making loud-mouthed statements about the fight against terrorism and the preservation of the freedom of the people, which neither she nor the entire German government can keep. At the same time as this is about to happen, a rare spectacle and event is taking place. It will be on Saturday, 4th of December, when a thunderclap of thunder rises over southwest Australia, when a glowing and roving meteor, about the size of a water ball, penetrates the Earth's atmosphere and illuminates large areas on its trajectory to the Earth before crashing into the sea. Then there is the following. About a week ago, you are certainly informed about this by the news, a serious chemical accident or a huge chemical explosion occurred in China, namely in the province of Jilin. As a result, huge quantities of toxic substances were released into the Songhua River, which provides drinking water for millions of humans in China and Russia. Mainly, the river is now polluted by benzene and nitrobenzene, making the water toxic and undrinkable. As a result, drinking water shortages will occur mainly in the Chinese million city of Harbin and the city of Jiamusi, as well as elsewhere along the river, such as in the Russian cities of Khabarovsk, Amursk, and Komsomolsk-na-Amur, etc. In Russia, the river is called Amur because it flows out of China into Russia and also crosses this country. As usual, however, the whole thing will only become public when it can no longer be concealed, both in China and in Russia. Another major chemical accident will occur in China in a chemical factory in Dianzhang this week, after which North China will be hit by an earthquake that will also cause a number of humans to lose their lives. When the events of the water poisoning become obvious, it also turns out that the new and fanatical Pope, Joseph Ratzinger, will issue an edict against the homosexuals who want to become priests that homosexuals are no longer allowed to celebrate their ordination. This is tantamount to a medieval witch hunt and an insult and discrimination as well as unfairness against homosexuals in general, not only with regard to candidates for priesthood. The next event will take place on Friday and Saturday, 25th and 26th November, with an unusually heavy snowfall, as this will be the first official onset of winter, which will first be announced by a very cold spell and then bring heavy snowstorms in large parts of Europe, leading to unusual traffic chaos and accidents on the roads throughout Europe, with northern Germany being particularly affected. The snowstorm also leads to extensive power failures because a number of large metal power poles break like matches and power lines are pushed down dangerously close to the ground by the heavy snow load. Hundreds of thousands of humans will be without electricity, while many food items stored in refrigerators will also be spoiled, causing food problems for some people. Some lives will also be lost as a result of these events, as well as the homeless who will freeze to death. Also in the USA and Colorado, blizzards will cause disaster and claim lives. The next event will then follow on Sunday, November 27th, in the south of Iran, where a seaquake of magnitude 5.9 will occur at a depth of over 30,000 meters below the Persian Gulf near the island of Qeshm, destroying 7 villages and causing some deaths. Next, during the same period and the following days, heavy rainstorms will occur in Italy, causing the Tiber River to flood and cause deluges, which will also partially affect the city of Rome. Colombia is also hit by rainstorms, causing major flooding, which in turn claims a number of lives. The Canary Islands will also be affected by a tropical storm, which will cause severe destruction and also, as in northern Europe with the huge snowfall, the breaking of metal electricity pylons, leaving hundreds of people without energy. Unfortunately, human lives will also be lost as a result of this event. In the USA, too, huge snowstorms will rage in various states, with the snow reaching a height of over 2.5 meters and also claiming human lives. Also in the north of Pakistan, the onset of winter due to the cold will claim the first human lives. We should also mention the climate conference, at which 38 countries want to reduce CO2 emissions to the 1990 level in accordance with the Kyoto Protocol, which is to be implemented by 2012. However, The whole thing is a meaningless undertaking, and bears witness to the incomprehension and ignorance of the earthly scientists and those responsible. The whole enterprise is nonsensical, because by the year 2012 the total world population will have increased by billions more, and because, accordingly, new emissions of CO2 will be emitted in enormous quantities. Because the demand for all kinds of goods and for energy, etc., of all those people who need all these things in the next 6 years must be covered. This means that the mass of CO2 will inevitably continue to rise inexorably. There is only one real possibility to reduce these emissions, and that is the radical reduction of overpopulation in such a wise that a worldwide birth stop is decreed. For example, in a 7-year periodical, 7 years birth stop, 7 years possibility of procreation, and must also be designed so that procreation is only allowed in moderation. And what is to be said? The fact that the USA, as one of the world's largest atmospheric, air, and polluting countries, is refusing to reduce its CO2 emissions is an incredible crime against the Earth, its nature, humanity, fauna, and flora. Again, the self-importance and arrogance of the USA cannot be surpassed, as is also the case in many other things and issues. And it must also be said that climate change can no longer be stopped due to the blame of human activity, with Europe being particularly hard hit by this climate change. Besides other pollutants, the enormous CO2 emissions contribute to this, which are the largest in Europe besides the USA. The effect of this is that the climate change in Europe is progressing about 1/3 faster than in the rest of the world. A decisive factor in the rapid climate change in Europe is also based on the fact that the Gulf Stream is cooling down more and more due to pollution, environmental destruction, and the cutting down and destruction of rainforests, as well as the melting of the Arctic and Antarctic ice masses. This is a fact that will finally be scientifically recognized and made public, but it is already too late to change the whole thing significantly. But if the Earth human does not finally become aware of the whole knowledge and does not act responsibly by rigorously reducing the population of the Earth to a planet-compatible level by stopping the births, then in the end, such a catastrophe by natural forces and epidemics, etc., will befall humankind and the planet as well as the fauna and flora, so that the whole existence will be called into question. What will happen in the coming days and weeks are also other unpleasant things. In Iraq, for example, for the first time a German citizen will be kidnapped, by mistake, together with her chauffeur by extremists who will demand that Germany end its cooperation with the Iraqi government, which Germany will not do under the patronage of the appointed chancellor. Only big words are being spoken, but truly nothing real is being done to meet the demands of the kidnappers. In addition to this hostage-taking, in which everything remains uncertain for a long time because the kidnappers do not respond to appeals and the 2 hostages suffer an uncertain fate for weeks, there will be other kidnappings in which the hostages will be foreigners from different countries, but whose lives will be endangered because the demands will not be met, which then actually demands the lives of hostages. On 1st December near Zurich in Oberglatt, Switzerland, there will be a distressing incident in which a boy will be attacked by 3 free-range fighting dogs and killed by them in a terrible manner. And this only because the authorities of Switzerland, in their irresponsibility, have still not taken any decisive steps to prohibit the keeping of any kind of fighting dogs and other aggressive dogs, even though the longer and shorter past was repeatedly marked by such terrible events. Because of the coming sad events, however, finally, too late for the little one, some official steps are taken, which are in no wise yet sufficient and correspond more to an alibi exercise than something permanently effective. Only the canton of Valais will immediately enact a strict and effective law prohibiting the keeping of 12-12 fighting dog breeds, but this will be implemented only slowly. The 10-year-old son of your cousin Alfred Flückiger also suffered the same fate when he was mauled and killed by a shepherd dog years ago, although the boy and the dog had grown up together and always frolicked around together. Dogs of all kinds, like all animals, are always susceptible to the wild instinct and therefore remain unpredictable, even if they are mistakenly classified as harmless by taming and dressage. A wild animal always remains a wild animal, even if it has been bred into other species and is considered a harmless pet. An animal can at any time, as you say, fall back into its wild instinct out of the blue and react accordingly. So in this respect, it is irresponsible to call an animal harmless. A fact which is undeniable if rationally thought about. And you too have had an experience in this regard, and an experience when, as a boy, your pet cat attacked you and tore open the back of your left hand in such a manner that you needed medical help quickly, and the healing took about 2 months, because a serious infection caused great difficulties in healing. But let me tell you more about what will happen in the coming weeks. Already in the first days of December, the 1,000th person since the reintroduction of the death penalty about 30 years ago will be executed or murdered by the U.S. criminal law in the USA. It is regarding a man named Kenneth Lee Boyd, who was convicted of murder like any judicial execution. This is a state-sanctioned and legalized murder for which the responsible judges who pronounce the death penalty, as well as the executioners, would have to be banished for life. This also applies to the U.S. President George Walker Bush, who, in reference to this 1,000th execution, continues to show his true Christian convictions and love for humankind and neighbor, and who will proclaim that he considers the death penalty to be the right thing to do and a good punishment. He is a man who does not shy away from murder in relation to the death penalty and to acts of war and other acts of terrorism. In his psychopathic, paranoid self-importance, he lets others murder for him because he does not value and respect the human beings and their lives. He is only interested in the power which he can exercise and through which he can send people to their death in a completely irresponsible manner. In no wise does it concern him as to what these people murdered by him suffer and what those suffer who he continues to send to death. It is not about his life and his head, which is marked by abysmal fear and cowardice, but which he knows how to cover up with the cloak of his sectarianism. Also in Singapore, the judiciary, and a very large part of the population, is marked by self-importance and sends people to their deaths without hesitation. So on the 2nd of December, a human is executed by hanging for drug trafficking in Singapore, a young man named Nguyen Tuong Van from Australia. The new Pope Joseph Ratzinger exercises a different kind of self-importance. In the coming weeks, he expresses himself in an unbelievable impudence through the voice of the Vatican in such a wise that he openly implements a decree of his predecessor, which he had made some time ago, and forbids his Catholic-believing flocks of faith-based mixed marriages, that is to say, a marriage with a Muslim person or any other person of different beliefs. This will also be the time when Honduras will be hit by severe storms that cause great destruction and cause loss of life. Heavy and unusually heavy snowfalls will also occur in Ticino, and in the south of France and in Italy down to Venice, etc. There will be rain and snowstorms, causing not only damage and flooding, but also, in some cases, such that road and rail traffic will collapse, creating a state of emergency. South India will also be hit by very heavy rains, which will cause flooding and deaths, while Manila will be inundated by floods. Then it also turns out that the bird epidemic is occurring again in Romania, but also in the Ukraine. Then in Africa, at Lake Tanganyika, there will be a more severe earthquake of magnitude 7.8. The next extraordinary event will take place in Iran, where on 6 December a military transport plane will crash into a high-rise building in the capital Tehran, claiming well over 200 lives. During the same period, it also turns out that one of the most dangerous volcanoes on the Earth will erupt again, namely the Manaro volcano on the South Pacific island state of Vanuatu. Then the Iranian President Ahmadinejad will again make a name for himself, who will deny the Jewish Holocaust and demand that the Israeli people be expelled from Israel and settled in Europe. Then, for once, there is a very pleasant thing to report that is happening in Mexico. Because this state formally abolishes the death penalty, because humanity is victorious, and from now on the word is that the death penalty is not compatible with human rights. In China, a massacre is once again being carried out by a large number of trigger-happy police who take radical action against the participants in a demonstration. The events will be the same as those that took place on the Place of Peace a number of years ago. Several hundred lives will be lost, but this will be covered up by all means, so the exact number will never be made public. The demonstration itself goes on for days and takes place in a city called Dongzhou. The next major event occurs in England, in the northern vicinity of London, where a huge fire catastrophe will occur when the Buncefield fuel depots, the largest fuel depots in England, explode. Around 20 fuel tanks will be affected, each of which holds 13.6 million liters of fuel. Unfortunately, a large number of people will also be injured by the event. The reason for the huge explosion is due to an act of terror, which at first is not recognized, and which will be concealed when this fact is finally recognized. The reason for this will then be to avoid scaring the British people. Whether the whole thing will finally be made public is not yet certain at this point, but it is clear that the first thing that will be claimed is that it was an accident. On the 11th of December, something extraordinary happens in Pakistan when a firework explodes under a bus of a wedding party, which also causes the vehicle to explode and burn, killing about 50 humans. On December 10th, an airplane misses the runway by a large distance and bursts into flames, killing about 110 people, mostly adolescents. A strange thing happens in the Brazilian Biritiba Mirim, because in this city the cemetery is overcrowded with deceased people, which is why the mayor shortly forbids the population to die under threat of sanctions. Although this will not be meant seriously, it will excite the people, which is also the purpose of the ban. There is hope that a new cemetery can be built, which is to be brought about by official talks. The current ban on building a new cemetery is based on the fact that the inhabited area and the old cemetery are located in a spring area that is used for drinking water production. Then it has to be said that another terrorist bombing will be carried out, this time in Greece on the Ministry of Economy in Athens, with the 17th November terrorist cell behind it. At about the same time, Monday the 12th of December, the Hindu Kush in Afghanistan will be shaken by an earthquake of magnitude 6.7 as a further consequence of the severe earthquake in northern Pakistan. There is also a seaquake off the Fiji Islands. And in otherwise foreigner peaceful Australia, violent demonstrations break out against foreigners. Then it turns out that another man innocently accused of murder and convicted of it is executed in the USA, with the stupid Austrian-born Arnold Schwarzenegger, who acts as governor in California, who is self-important about life and death, and thus makes himself an unscrupulous murderer by not pardoning Stanley Tukey Williams, who has been sentenced to death and is in fact truly innocent, as he himself has repeatedly affirmed. He lets the innocent man go to his death only because he hopes to be re-elected governor by all the many death penalty advocates in California, because in doing so, this power-hungry man will walk over dead bodies, as you are used to saying. At about the same time, Iranian President Ahmadinejad is making another speech about himself, denying the Jewish Holocaust as a myth. It will also be the time when there is a terrorist attack on a large fuel depot in the USA, in New Jersey, which is largely trivialized as an accident and leak and is not even publicly acknowledged. On the 17th of December, winter sets in Europe with large snowstorms and lots of ice and snow, but this will also be the case in parts of Japan, where unusually heavy snow masses will fall, while in Southeast Asia heavy storms will rage, bringing flooding and also claim human lives. The 18th of December will bring the release of the German hostage, her name, Suzanne Osthoff, who was kidnapped weeks before by a criminal gang. The reason for the release will be based on the realization that there was a misunderstanding regarding the woman and her activities in Iraq. Her chauffeur, who was also kidnapped, will go into hiding, because in truth he is an accomplice of the kidnappers. In Graz, Austria, the birthplace of Californian Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, who is guilty of murder by execution by rejecting the plea for clemency of the innocent Stanley Tukey, Williams becomes apparent. There is great indignation against Schwarzenegger, whose name is also to be erased in a sports facility. There are also voices calling for his civil rights to be revoked. On the same day, the inhuman Ariel Sharon, the mighty one of Israel, is struck by a stroke and then lapses into unconsciousness, whereby he is admitted to hospital but is soon released. The same thing, but in a worse form, will happen again for the war criminal and butcher of Beirut, A. Sharon, as he is called by the Palestinians and others, on the 4th of January 2006, from which he will not recover, because this will be the beginning of his end. A second industrial disaster will occur in China, because in Beijing, in Guangdong province, a chemical plant will pour a large amount of cadmium-containing toxins into the Beiguang River from a chemical plant, endangering the drinking water supply. This is what happens when Japan is hit by unusually heavy and massive snowfalls and winter storms over a number of days, as is the case in Turkey at Christmas time. In London, it turns out that homosexual communities are officially allowed, according to which pop star Elton John will be the first to use the opportunity on the 21st of December to officially ally himself with his longtime partner in a two-party relationship. On the 22nd of December, a new bomb attack will take place in Greece, but it will not have any major consequences. After that, a stronger earthquake with a magnitude of 5.3 takes place in northern Pakistan, this time also shaking the capital Islamabad. But even this quake will not be the last in this area, because the series of earthquakes in this area will continue for a very long time, even centuries, which will also be the case in the Indian Ocean, where a wide seaquake is coming, which will have a magnitude of about 9 on the Richter scale and will cause a huge tsunami, which will once again produce a tremendous catastrophe, affecting Sumatra in particular, as well as the countries bordering the Indian Ocean. But it is too early to report on this now because this event is still in the distant future. What will happen towards the end of December is unusually heavy snowfall, snowstorms, and severe cold spells, which will also occur in the south of Switzerland, in Ticino, as well as in France. At the same time, Israel will again begin to carry out heavy bombing raids against Palestine, terrorizing the population, while terrorist acts from Palestinian ranks will also be the result. Israel exercises terror to such an extent that it establishes a death zone in the Gaza Strip, as was already the case in the GDR, whereby this monstrosity is trivially referred to as a buffer zone. In Brazil, where prison riots are actually part of the daily agenda, another prisoners' revolt takes place, with around 200 women and children being taken hostage. While in Yemen, the former German Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, Jürgen Krobog, is kidnapped together with his family by members of a tribe in order to free imprisoned tribal members. The captivity will last about a week. Then, in Cairo, Egypt, it turns out that police forces ruthlessly attack a large refugee camp of Sudanese refugees that has been in existence for months, in order to drive them out, causing a large number of humans to lose their lives. Already the turn of the year and the first days of the new year 2006 bring very unpleasant things and events worldwide, as for example in Turkey, where 3 siblings, a boy and 2 girls, will die of the bird epidemic H5N1, whereby, however, also others will fall ill with the epidemic. While in Iraq, right at the turn of the year, whole series of bomb attacks will take place, which will also continue into the year, whereby hundreds of humans will be killed. At the same time, dozens of severe bushfires will rage and get out of control in Southeast Australia, as they will in the USA, Texas, and Oklahoma, while in California severe rainstorms will bring floods and inundations, causing severe damage and loss of life. And also in the USA, in West Virginia, there will be a serious mining accident with several deaths, who are first falsely named as healthy survivors by their families, before it will be known after several hours that all but 1 miner lost their lives. Indonesia, too, will suffer from violent monsoon storms, especially the island of Java, as large landslides, floods, and mudslides will cause much disaster and also claim human lives. Also, the earthquake area in the north of Pakistan will be affected by disaster because heavy snow and rainfall, as well as great cold, will break out, which will unfortunately also kill many humans because they find death through illness. On the 2nd of January, Germany will have a serious accident in Bavaria because in Bad Reichenhall the roof of an ice rink will collapse and 15 people will be buried and killed. But there will be a series, because in Ostrava, in the Czech Republic, the roof of a supermarket will also collapse, and in Austria, in Innsbruck, the roofs of 2 large halls will collapse, which will continue in Poland and in some other places in different countries. The reason will be that on the one hand, there are structural and maintenance defects in the roofs, and on the other hand, the excessive snowfall falling on them, sometimes mixed with rain, will cause a heavy weight overload that the roofs will no longer be able to withstand, thus causing the collapse. At the same time, the Emir of Dubai, Sheikh Maktoum Rashid Al Maktoum, dies while a severe seaquake measuring 6.7 on the coast of Mexico occurs. That, dear friend, is the prediction I have to report. They are valid until midnight, the 5th of January, 2006.
Thank you for your many remarks. Then a question regarding the year 2006. What about the prophetic threat of a Third World War? How does the present situation relate to it?
At the present time, the political situation in the world is somewhat in a state of rest from which there are no signs of a Third World War. But as is the case with the Earth humans, this can very easily change from 1 hour or from one day to the next. So it is only to be hoped that the somewhat calm situation will continue and that the prophesied evil will not appear, which can very well be unless state powers like George W. Bush and his ilk suddenly go crazy again. However, the current political situation gives hope that further steps will be taken in the present somewhat positive direction, and that the catastrophe and the fulfillment of the prophecy can be truly prevented. Furthermore, it must also be said that it is not clear from the prophecy whether the year 2006 is to be taken into account according to the present calendar, or whether the figure refers to the time after the birth of Emmanuel, after which the Christian world at the turn of the year already enters the year 2008 or the year 2010. Accordingly, the year 2006 would have passed 2 years ago.
Of course, that has to be taken into account. But have you not yet researched the year 2006 in advance?
We have not. As I said earlier, we are only looking ahead for a few more weeks to see what will happen on the Earth. And we are only doing this because you asked me to.
Of course, that was the agreement.
Correct. Now I have one more question to ask. How far has the interview video which Christian makes with the explanations of the group members progressed? It would be very gratifying if it could be completed by next summer. It would probably be good if a DVD could be made of the work right away, because the video technology is being phased out.
I'm afraid I cannot answer your question because I do not know how far the whole thing has progressed. But the idea of a DVD is a good one. I will bring it to Christian's attention.
Then you should ask. And you can also pass on a wish of mine to Piero right away, namely regarding a collection of all the photos on which our beam ships and landing tracks, as well as other tracks in connection with our appearance, are recorded and provided with appropriate texts. It would be desirable that the whole work appears in color. It would be very desirable to complete such a collective photo book as soon as Piero has finished the poster work.
You seem impatient, my son, and at your age.
Time is passing, my friend. Life is far too short to fritter it away in terms of all that needs to be learned and created, and to achieve what needs to be achieved.
Ha! You of all people say that when you still have centuries ahead of you. What can I say to that, as I have the last few years of my life ahead of me? My life is really very short when I compare it to yours.
The lifespan is always to be seen in relation to the possible age, and what could still be done in the old years of life as a result of grown knowledge, abilities, and possibilities. At a young age, life seems to last forever. In middle years, things begin to emerge which show that aging has begun and life is limited. And at a higher age, the realization is reached that much has been missed in life and must be made up for in order to achieve the full workload of the evolution and fulfillment of one's duties. And this is the result of your life expectancy as well as mine. When thus the higher or old age comes, regardless of whether life expectancy is on average 82 or 1,050 years, then life is still too short to achieve, learn, and work on everything that has been omitted, neglected, or forgotten during life, and what is still recognized at a higher or old age with regard to what could and must still be done and accomplished, or what is still achieved and wants to be done, but for which the remaining lifespan is no longer sufficient. Therefore, life is always too short, no matter how high the life expectancy is.
What you are saying has a point. But tell me, what's all this about your son-in-law or Simya Sei's husband suffering a ship breakdown and falling into a sun?
He was on an expedition with a group of friends from our federation. Their technology did not yet correspond to our knowledge and standards at that time, which is why their flying machines were not yet as safe as ours. So it could happen that one of the flying machines was disturbed in its function by a heavy technical damage in such ammonair that it could no longer be steered and crashed into a sun. My daughter Simya Sei's marriage partner was traveling with the group in question in one of their flying machines to explore the said sun when the damage occurred and the accident happened.
Oh, then it was not one of your ships that he was in when it crashed.
That is what I said. Our friend's flying machines at that time were still deficient in terms of safety, but that has changed fundamentally since then, because they were able to take over a lot of our technology. But now, Edward, my friend, I have to go again. Farewell, and salami.
Take care, Ptah. It is an honor to call you my friend, too. Goodbye.